A senior Democrat who serves on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee says it is baffling that the Trump administration has decided to admit Afrikaners for resettlement while continuing an indefinite suspension on the refugee applications of thousands of other legitimate asylum seekers who face prosecution and persecution in their countries. The Senate member, who is also a ranking member on the committee, released a statement pointing to what she called a United Nations finding that said no South Africans were eligible for refugee status. Let's get you more then on the latest reaction to the resettlement of those 49 South Africans. Bring in SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease live for us in New York tonight. Sherwin, let's start with those scenes of welcome yesterday as these 49 South Africans arrived in Washington, and now the backlash and criticism that the Trump administration is facing from the Episcopal Church and the Senate member.
Well, I'll tell you this, Tembekile, the arrival of these 49, some reports suggest there were actually 59 people, so there's a dispute on the exact number, but it has catalyzed what the Trump administration is pushing here in terms of the reaction we are now seeing in terms of domestic reaction, be that from the U.S. media, and certainly some lawmakers, congressional lawmakers in the main, a number of senators weighing in on this resettlement. And then, of course, also a message from the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. Essentially, the Episcopal Church has received federal grants from the U.S. government to assist in the resettlement of refugees from around the world in terms of the now suspended U.S. refugee program. And I want to read you what the presiding bishop, Sean Rowe, wrote to Episcopal congregants in terms of their decision to no longer work with the Trump administration, the U.S. government, in terms of the resettlement, in particular, the resettlement of those 49 or 59 Afrikaners that arrived from South Africa yesterday. He writes, and I'm just going to read this, just over 2 weeks ago, the federal government informed the Episcopal Migration Ministries that under the terms of our federal grant, we are expected to resettle white Afrikaners from South Africa, whom the U.S. government has classified as refugees. In light of our church's steadfast commitment to racial justice and reconciliation and our historic ties to the Anglican Church of Southern Africa, we are not able to take the step. Accordingly, we have determined that by the end of the federal fiscal year, we will conclude our refugee resettlement grant agreements with the U.S. federal government. He continues, it has been painful to watch one group of refugees selected in a highly unusual manner receive preferential treatment over many others who have been waiting in refugee camps or dangerous conditions for years. And that is the broader context here, Tembekile. The U.S. refugee program has essentially been suspended. One of the first executive orders Donald Trump signed on January 20th this year, soon after taking the oath of office for his second term, suspended all resettlement of refugees that had already been vetted. They were in the system. They were ready to board planes to the United States. So the question now becoming here in a domestic sense is why the white Afrikaners from South Africa and not all the other people that had been vetted from conflict zones around the world. Let me read you what Senator Jeanne Shaheen, the ranking Democrat senator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, she writes, it's baffling as to why the Trump administration is admitting Afrikaners for resettlement while continuing an indefinite suspension for thousands of legitimate asylum seekers who have fled persecution, often because their lives were at risk. Last year, the UN found no South Africans were eligible for refugee status. The decision by this administration to put one group at the front of the line is clearly politically motivated and an effort to rewrite history. The administration must clarify why these individuals qualify for refugee status and resettlement in the United States and why they have been prioritized over refugees like Afghans, Burmese, Rohingya and Sudanese who have fled their homes due to conflict and persecution. And it's good to point out at this point that the Biden administration had determined before they left office that there was, in fact, a genocide happening, particularly in the Darfur region, in terms of that ongoing war in Sudan. She then urges the administration to use this moment to lift the indefinite suspension of the U.S. refugee admissions program and restore this life-saving tool for the world's most vulnerable refugees. Another Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland was in conversation at a think tank in Washington, D.C. overnight. This is what he had to say about the admission of Afrikaners to the United States overnight.
To watch the Trump administration apply what I call their global apartheid policy by providing sort of asylum or refugee status to some Afrikaners, white South Africans, while they shut everybody else out, is just an outrageous insult to the whole idea of our country and the whole idea of Dr. King. At the end of the day, it's character that counts. We have to call it out for what it is. It's an application of a global apartheid policy by the Trump administration.
Tembekile, Chris Van Hollen there in conversation at the Center for American Progress. And let me just give you this anecdote. The Guardian reporting that there was the executive director of a refugee support organization in Washington called Homes Not Borders, Laura Thompson Osuri. She stood at the check-in at Dulles International Airport awaiting the arrival of those refugees yesterday, and she stood with a sign that read, refugee, full stop, noun, full stop. A person who has been forced to leave his or her country due to persecution, war, or violence. Afrikaners are not refugees.
And on that note then, Sherwin, let's speak more. You referenced The Guardian. Let's talk about how American media is actually covering the story and perhaps even the level of interest domestically.
Let me tell you, it has gone through the roof since the catalytic nature of these arrivals, right? Remember, Donald Trump signed this executive order pointing to egregious acts in the Republic of South Africa, listing all sorts of things, including South Africa's foreign policy positions. But it came at a time when so many executive orders were being signed, federal workers were being laid off, USAID was being defunded, foreign aid was being stopped. There was a lot of chaos at the time. And so, right or wrongly, the US media didn't focus so much on the executive order that pertained to South Africa, certainly not as much as we did. And what you're now seeing with the arrival of this, real big questions being asked as to why this group of so-called refugees is being allowed and certainly preferred by the Trump administration, when there are so many, there's been a vast refugee admissions program that essentially has been now suspended for 90 days at least, if not more. And, there are very important questions being asked about Afghan refugees, interpreters that worked alongside U.S. forces in that war that were promised admission to the United States, Sudanese refugees that are fleeing a verified genocide that the U.S. administration itself, in a rigorous process, determined that there was genocide and ethnic cleansing happening in Western Darfur. Those people are now not allowed to come to the United States. Eastern Congo, refugees from Eastern Congo, one of the largest refugee situations anywhere in the world, and the list goes on. And so the question they are now asking and pointing to the fact that they do not believe, certainly US media is doing this in their rigorous analysis of this equation, that there is no genocide in South Africa. And what we saw on CNN last night was a discussion about, well, there is crime in South Africa. We understand that there is crime in South Africa, but it is crime that affects all races and not just a white Afrikaner minority. And so one imagines moving forward, these questions are going to continue to be asked. You've seen some interventions now from the ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The question then becomes, will there be hearings as to this? They are seeking answers from the administration as to why this group and not others. And that is a conversation that continues to be had here and one expects will continue into the near future.
Sherwin, and we trust you to keep us across all those reactions. For now, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, a man in New York, thank you.